We're learning the third sikha of Parshas Behaaloscha in Chelek Chav Gimel on page 82. The shir today is being learned Lil Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Koltman. In Rambam in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah wo es retzich wegen Inyan HaNevuah. The Rambam in the halachas of Yesodei HaTorah speaks about the halachas related to prophecy. And there he says that it's Miyesodei Adas. It's from the principles of our faith, Leida Shakel Menabes Bnei Adam, to know that Hashem communicates with human beings, prophecy. Zok the Rambam, so there the Rambam says as follows when he gives the qualifications for who it is that can be a prophet. Ve'ein hanevuah chola ela al chacham gadol b'chachma. Prophecy will only be upon one that's very wise with wisdom. Giboyer b'midaisav, one that's strong, mighty in his character. And there's no matter in the world that his yetzer, his evil inclination, will have any power over him regarding anything in the world. Ella, rather, whom is gaber bedaita yitzre tamid, he's able with his mind to overcome his yetzer, his inclination constantly. And he has a very broad mind and to a very great extent. This is what brings a person to be on the level to be qualified to be a prophet. Und danach is the Rambam befaret dem Seder von Novi Zanhage bepoil v'chulu. Then the Rambam goes on to spell out the details of the behavior of a Novi and how actual prophecy takes effect on him. The commentaries ask and what the Rambam says there for the qualifications of a prophet. In Masechta Nedarim, Zok Rabbi Yechanan, the Gemara in Nedarim quotes Rabbi Yechanan saying, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mashre shchinasai ela al gibor v'ashir v'chacham v'anav, that Hashem does not rest upon a person, so speaking about a person being a prophet, only if he's strong, mighty, asher, rich, chacham, wise, and anav, and one that is humble, and v'kula mi Moshe. And they're all learned from what we find by Moshe Rabbeinu. The Torah describes his character and his qualities as a prophet. Wie es wird dort abgelernt vom Pasuk jeder Prat. The Gemara there learns each detail from the Psukim, bis Onav, to the final qualification, being humble. The Chsiv, as the Pasuk says, for Ish Moshe Onav Moed, that Moshe Rabbeinu was very humble. Was von dem is Mashma, so from this Gemara it seems, from the Psukim Raya, if you look there at the Psukim that are brought as a source for these qualifications, as Giboid un Asher, being mighty and being rich, this means physically, regarding the might of this person's body, and regarding his riches, regarding his money and his possessions that he owns. And the Rambam does not quote these two qualifications at all. Why? Besides the fact that the Rambam seems to just talk about the character of the Navi, his wisdom, his spiritual ability to overcome the Yetzer Hara, he doesn't at all focus on anything physical about who he is, his qualifications. But also the Rambam seems to skip two basic things that the Gemara says, Rabbi Yechanan says, to be rich in the simple literal sense, and anav, to be humble, not mentioned at all in the Rambam. The Kesef Mishnah is Masber, so the Kesef Mishnah addresses this question and he explains. As das was der Rambam sagt, is mitzat svara de nafshei kamar, ve'loi maha de Rabbi Yonasan. The Rambam here, when he explains and gives the qualifications for a Navi, he's saying this from his own, logically, that a Navi is one that is on this level, and he's not quoting from the Gemara that brings Rabbi Yonasan in the version of the Kesef Mishnah, or Rabbi Yechanan, as we have it in our Gemara. Und his Masber and the Kesef Mishnah goes on to explain as the time was the Rambam bringt nicht die Pratamanal. The reason the Rambam does not quote the details as Rabbi Yechanan says them in the Gemara is weil Rabbi Yechanan b'Marei Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mashre shchinaseh. Rabbi Yechanan in his statement when he speaks about the fact that the Shechina will not rest upon a person unless he has those qualifications, red wegen ashras hashchina in aneifen von kviyas. He's referring to the Shechina resting upon a person in a more permanent manner. One that could be defined as a Navi, as the many prophets we know throughout history in the times of the prophets. The Rosh is Mefarish ben Nedarim, as the Rosh there explains in that Gemara Nedarim, that it's referring to a person that is a prophet permanently. Und fordern sich die alle Tnaim. And for this, it is necessary to have all these conditions. Aber shalei bekvias, however, for one to have the ability to prophesize, not in a permanent basis, not to be qualified to really always be defined as a prophet, it's possible for a person to prophesize, even without having all of these characteristics. From Rabbi Yochanan mentions Giboy Asher Chacham Va'ana, of being mighty, rich, smart, or wise, and humble. V'Rabbeinu le'nachas hachal lefarish el etnaya novi lisnabis v'afilu shelo yehei bekvias. So here the Rambam, when he gives the qualifications of the character of the Navi, his wisdom, his spiritual level, he's not speaking about a person that will be defined permanently as a prophet. Rather, he's speaking about the qualities of one that would temporarily or at any time have the ability to prophesize. That's what the Rambam is discussing, so it's different qualifications. It's not what the Gemara, what Rabbi Yochanan was talking about. That's the Kesef Mishnah's Pshat for the Rambam. Der Teretz is aber l'chayre nit glatik. However, this answer is not smooth. Warum? Because in addition to the fact, was lefizek kumtais, according to this, it comes out something very interesting. As the mile is gashmias, when it comes to those qualifications that relate to the person's physical condition, gibar begufay, mighty with his body, va'ashir kipshutai, to be literally rich, zenenegeyat, so ashras ashchina bekvias, they are significant when it comes to having the shchina rest upon a person permanently, more than the spiritual qualifications of a person having fine character and so on. Seemingly, you would expect the opposite to be true. The ruchni is the gemailes, the spiritual qualities, they should be a greater cause for the shchina to rest upon a person permanently, than mighty physical might or riches physically. So it's logically it's very hard to explain that the Gemara is discussing a prophet that's permanently a prophet, and for that it's necessary to have physical qualifications. Besides this, is kosher, it's difficult to explain that this is what the Rambam means. Why would the Rambam be discussing the shchina resting on a person and having prophecy not permanently? Why would the Rambam not discuss what are the conditions in order for the shchina to rest upon a person permanently? Was das is doch gewend matzav an avur from Moshe, Yeshaya, Yirmiyah, v'chulu, and being on this level where you have the permanent resting of shchina upon a person being a prophet is what Moshe Rabbeinu was, and Yeshaya and Yirmiyah and so on, all the Nevi'im. HaNevi'im HaMufurashim b'Torah, the Nevi'im that the Torah explicitly speaks about. So if the Rambam is discussing the Nevuah, why would he not discuss the qualifications regarding those Nevi'im that we're familiar with, that we know that the Torah speaks about? Additionally, is l'chayre mera negeit zum mevayir sein a matzav kavua, wie mevayir zu sein an einmalige Sache oder bechlal a matzav varei. Besides the fact that those that the Nevi'im were familiar with, and it says in Torah, it's more relevant to discuss Nevuah as something which is permanent and something which defines a person than a temporary and one-time ability to prophesize. And yet another question on the Kesef Mishnah's Pshat, and a main question here, from Pashtus Lashon Rambam in der Halacha, looking at the simple language of the Rambam here in this Halacha, and looking also at the following Halachas, is mashma, it seems as a ret that what the Rambam is discussing here is Aleph number 1, wegen Ashras, Hashchina Bekvias, wegen Hanavi Kavua, speaking about the Shchina resting upon a person permanently, a person that's defined as a prophet. Bey is the halachas wegen alle suge neviim. The Rambam here is discussing various different levels and kinds of prophets, so it's hard to narrow down the words of the Rambam here with these qualifications to someone that can prophesize on a very temporary basis. So we're left with our question, why does the Rambam not bring the qualifications that Rabbi Yochanan says in the Gemara Nedarim? As an Adam Forschung was verantworten verkehrt. There are other commentaries that answer and explain the Rambam with an opposite point. The Rambam halt, it's the Rambam's opinion, as the halacha bleibt nicht wie Rabbi Yochanan. that we don't follow Rabbi Yochanan's qualifications. On as Gibar Noshe, to be mighty and physically mighty, and to be rich, b'muvanim ha'pashut in their simple sense, zenenit muchrach zu ashras hashchina, are not a necessary qualification for the Shechina resting upon a person. V'haraya, and the proof of this is, zwischen die Neviim zene gewen azelache, was zene nit gewen ken Gibayrim oder Ashirim. They were prophets, they were not physically mighty, and they were not rich. This is muchach oich shas, and this is proven from what the Gemara brings as es can sein ashras hashchina oich of them was is nit kenoshe, also on an individual that's not rich. The Gemara bringt bekame mekaymis dem sipur. The Gemara in a few places brings the story as es is hareis habaskol min hashamayim, that a heavenly voice came out on hat gesagt and announced yesh kan echad sheroi shetishra olav shchina k'moshe Rabbeinu. There is a person here in the world that is befitting that the Shechina should rest upon him. K'moshe Rabbeinu, similar to Moshe Rabbeinu. Ela she'ein doiroi zakai lekach. The generation, though, is not worthy of this. When the Chachamim heard this heavenly voice, Nasnu Chachamim Eseineihem Behillel Azaken. Who did they look upon? This voice was referring to Hillel Azaken that was on this level. Now, if that what it means is that Hillel was qualified to be a prophet for the Shechina to rest, to dwell upon him. What Hillel is, Ki Yidua Gever Agreisani. Hillel, as it's known, as described in Gemara, was extremely poor. So obviously we see here that the qualification of being rich, literally, is not something that's accepted lahalacha. Therefore, the Rambam does not quote what Rabbi Yochanan says regarding these qualifications, whether physical might or riches, literally. So this answers regarding gvura, the physical might, and riches. As leibta, but the shaila benegeh dem was brengt onov. The question, though, still remains: why does the Rambam not quote the qualification that Rabbi Yochanan says that one has to be humble? Was adarabe. Now, on the contrary, from dem Sipar Anal and Gemara benegeh to Hillel Azaken is mashma. From this very story about Hillel Azaken, it actually seems as das was that is given roish tishtar of Shechina. What was it about him that made him worthy of the Shechina resting upon him? Is given beikut salib zan anius, or anivus rather. This was primarily because of his humility. The Gemara firta eis, as the Gemara there concludes after this, so kishemeis, when he passed away, amru chulu, they said about him, haya anav chulu, that he was humble. So adarabah, from this story itself, it's proof that this is a very important qualification, and the Rambam still does not quote this. And as mashma b'parsha seinu, it seems so also from the psukim in the end of our parsha, as das was the pasuk zogt, va'ish Moshe anav ma'oid nikola damashapnei adama, that Moshe Rabbeinu was very humble from all people on the face of the earth. Is ke'enak dame to them was steht gleich nach them. The Torah is describing Moshe Rabbeinu's character as being humble, as sort of an introduction to what follows. That loy kein avdi Moshe, my servant Moshe is not like the rest of you. B'chol beisi nemanu, in all of my house, he's trusted. Pe el pe adaber boy, I speak to him mouth to mouth. Umare, with a clear appearance. V'loy b'chidus etmunas Hashem yabed v'gayme, not anything which is with some kind of indirect riddles or so on. Describing the level of prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. Wo der Eibishter is mafli, mailas hanavuah from Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem here is speaking about the great level of prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, all following the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu was extremely humble. So we see that humility is a qualification for nevuah. So why does the Rambam omit this? The Pashtos, what me gekent empferen. So simply, for this qualification of humility, we can answer as der Tnai von Onav, that this qualification of being humble is nichlal in them, was the Rambam sagt, it's actually included in what the Rambam does describe. Gibar b'midaisav, one that's very strong with his character, v'lo yehei yitzrem is gaber olav b'dava b'olam chulu, and his inclination should never overcome him for anything in the world. Vas oich anava is from the Mailas Hamidus, so he's talking about someone with very strong and good character, so that includes also humility, which is one of the most basic things in having good character. And similar, we can also say regarding the qualifications of a person being strong physically, as the Rinyan from Gibar B'Koyach, that a person should be strong, physical might, bringt the Rambam Behemshich Devarav. The Rambam quotes and says later on, Adam shehu memule b'chol hamidus ha'elu, a person that's filled with all of his character, shalem b'gufay, he is complete with his physical body. which seems to indicate that the Rambam is including in this also the physical well-being, the strength, the might of the person. So if so, we could say that the Rambam did include these two qualifications here. However, this answer is insufficient. Aleph, number one, afile oib me soll sagen. As mit Shalom begufay da meint der Rambam euch brius shleimes aguf kipshutay. Even if we'll argue and say that the expression of Shalom begufay is referring to the physical health and might of the person. Even if that's the case. But nevertheless, is das noch nicht der Matze von Gibar. However, there's no indication here to the fact that this is a person that has to be mighty, strong. The Rambam is just talking about Shalom begufay, being physically fit and healthy. And either way, is nit move on, it still would not be understood. Why is the Rambam bringing this qualification of being mighty only in the continuations of his words? And why doesn't he say this explicitly? And there in the beginning of his words where he brings the conditions, the qualifications for prophecy. And also, similar, the question still remains regarding the qualification of humility. Since in the Gemara it does specify the qualification of humility separately, why did the Rambam not also specify the qualification of humility separately? Now, this is all the questions on the Rambam based on the Gemara in Masechta Nedarim, Rabbi Yochanan. Now here the Rabbi brings us another place in Gemara where it discusses the qualifications for the Shechina resting upon a person. The Gemara Hanal wird euch gebracht in Masechta Shabbos. This Gemara discussing regarding the qualifications of Nevuah is also in the Gemara in Shabbos. Und dort wird gesagt, and there the Gemara says as follows: Ein ha-Shechina shoire ela al chacham. The Shechina will not rest upon a person unless he is wise, gibar, strong, v'ashir, and rich, ubal kaima, and a tall individual. So this is the qualifications that it says here. So here, as you notice right away, there are some differences from the way the Gemara describes and gives the qualification in Masechta Nedarim. Davon verstehen, so the question here is, wie the Lechem Mishnah fragt, as the Lechem Mishnah asks this contradiction between these two Gemaras. Das was the Gemara is Meisav Bal Kaima. So the obvious difference is the Gemara here adds a new qualification that it didn't mention in the Nedarim, Bal Kaima, to be tall. So this addition is Yeshleima. We can say, as das is verbunden und an uptight from Gibar, that it's not really a separate qualification, but it's actually connected to, and it's really just coming to define what it means, or what's included in being strong. Was is negeh b'miyucha dort in the sugi in Shabbos, weil es retzach wegen goivan shalavim. And that's something which is relevant there specifically in that Gemara of Shabbos, because the discussion there in the Gemara began regarding how tall the Levium were, the discussion there regarding the Shabbos. So that's why the Gemara there brings out this detail of being tall. So that's a qualification that we could say is part of Giboy, which is mentioned in the Gemara in Nedarim. So Zabishver, however, there are another 2 points though where we could see a difference between the Gemara and Nedarim and what it says here in Shabbos. Aleph, the first is, Favas is the Gemara dort mashmit anov. Why over here in Shabbos does the Gemara omit the qualification of being humble? On Beis, the second question is Mishana dem Seder legabe vi in Nedarim. The order of the qualifications is different than the way it's quoted in Nedarim. There the order is Gibar Asher Chacham. First he has to be mighty, then rich, then it mentions the wisdom. Aneibendik mit Chacham Gibar. Here, however, it begins with first Chacham, wisdom, and then Gibar. What's the reason for this change? Noch hashine aloshen zwischen die zwei sugyas. Another change in the language between the two Gemaras. In the Nedarim state, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mashre Shchinasai. Hashem does not rest His Shechina upon a person. Beginning with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. On Shabbos, however, here in the Gemara in Shabbos, Ein HaShechina Sheirechulu. Does not start with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It just simply says the Shechina will not rest upon a person unless he has these qualifications. So what is the difference? What's the explanation for the two Gemaras discussing the qualifications of Nevuah that are saying something different? So we can explain all of this, and first to begin with the Rambam to understand what it is exactly that the Rambam is saying when he talks about the qualifications of a Navi. So first let's get a better definition of what prophecy is all about. By Mag design, the Minyan Nevuah, when it comes to define the concept of prophecy, Zok the Rambam in the Yud Gimel Ikrim Shalai. So the Rambam tells us in the 13 principles of faith that the Rambam brings and counts in Pirush HaMishnayos, famously the 13 principles of faith, and there one of them is about prophecy. So the Rambam says as follows, V'hu sheyeda Adam. This is that a person should know, Shezeh min ha'adam yimtza behem balitivim. So you have people that they are on the level of that their character, their nature is mimidois mu'ulois ma'od, a very high level of character. Ushleimois gedayla, to an utmost level of completeness or perfection. V'nafshisei and uchaynais, and their soul is very, very properly refined and prepared. Ad shehen mekablois tzuras haseichel, till the point that they're able to be a vessel to receive a revelation of intellect. We're talking here about a godly level of intellect that comes into them. And then, Achakain, Yidbak Oster Yaseichel Ha'anushi, Beseichel Hapoyel Venetzal Mimenu, Olav, Atzilus Nichbod. And then, these people that are on such a high level, that are an absolute keli to receive in them, level of intellect, Tzuras HaSeichel. So again, let me just repeat this. Perhaps in the beginning, the Rambam is talking here about the fact that they have zero level of selfishness or any own tendencies in their thinking, and they're completely pure to be open to the truth of intellect. And then, following this, they can actually then connect their human intellect to actually connect to Hashem's intellect. That's the Seichel HaPoyel V'Netzal, the Seichel of Creator, of the one that reveals himself upon them. Atzilus Nichbad, a very powerful revelation. Ve'ela Heim Anaviyim. These are the prophets. And V'zui Anavua, this is prophecy. So the Rambam over here, when he speaks about the 13 principles of faith, is describing not just the actual prophecy that takes place, the fact that Hashem reveals things through a prophet, but the Rambam is describing the character of the person that gets completely refined and elevated to the point that he is a keli, he's a vessel for this prophecy that is revealed in him. And similar, we can see also from the way that Rambam describes Nevuah in the Sefer Hayad, where the Rambam sagt, where the Rambam, when he begins to explain prophecy, so there, the Rambam says, right in the beginning of Perik Zayin of Hilchos Yisodei HaTorah, Yisodei Hadas, it's from the principles of our faith, Leida Shakel Menabas Bnei Adam, that Hashem will communicate through prophecy with a person. Und es gleich mamshich wegen die Prote etnoi anavua, and immediately the Rambam goes on to describe what are the conditions that prophecy should take effect on a person. Ve'ein anavua chala v'chulu, prophecy will not be upon a person unless, as we quoted before, the various different qualifications that Rambam says. Unoich wegen die Protim wie der Navi kommt zu l'navua, and the Rambam goes on to explain also details how a person will be worthy. How could he as a person qualify to come to prophecy? Und darki anavua, the ways of prophecy. Wie as mamshich in der halacha, as the Rambam continues there and describes in the halacha, that Adam chulu kishi konis lepardos chulu, when a person enters into this orchard, which is a holy spiritual place of Hashem's revelation. The halacha here of the Rambam in these details will be quoted soon. And then the Rambam goes on to describe actual prophecy. So what do we understand over here from the way the Rambam presents this? He begins talking about the fact that Nevuah is a principle of our faith, and then he goes on to describe the level and the character of the Navi that's worthy of this Nevuah coming through him. So what we understand from this is, the Rambam is telling us here, is nit stam zu metair sein, medir sein, die protim v'oifanim, and say that on Nevuah. The Rambam is not just simply giving us the details and a description of how exactly Nevuah prophecy will materialize in a person. Rather, these are actually all details that are relevant in what it is that we have to know about prophecy being one of the principles of faith. That's the context of where the Rambam brings it. He starts off with the fact that Nevuah, prophecy, is a principle of our faith, and he immediately goes on to explain how a person qualifies for this Nevuah and how it materializes in him. So therefore, what the Rambam is telling us is as follows. The principle of faith regarding prophecy is nit nor zu wissen, As es da der Inyan was es chal shoyre oiv b'nei yad. As es da der Inyan ha-nevuah was es chal v'shoyre b'nei yadam. It's not just to simply know the fact that there is communication from Hashem with human beings and this prophecy. Gila Seidai, that Hashem reveals His hidden secrets that all people are not aware of, and He reveals them to His servants, the prophets. B'chlal, the general idea that Hashem communicates with creation. Nor, but even more though, the Rambam is coming to tell you what is really this principle of faith, but also understanding exactly how, and what's the definition of how exactly a Navi takes in and experiences prophecy, as das ist verbunden mit Seichel v'das Navi. And the main point that Rambam here tells us is the qualifications of this Navi, the fact that the Navi gets elevated to the point that prophecy is something that he can take into his understanding because of the level that he brought himself to, that he's a vessel for this, that he's open to this. And this is something that in his mind, he can take in the communication of Hashem because of the purity and the purification, the refinement of his character and of his mind. And as the Rambam then continues and explains in the next halacha regarding Nevi'im in general. All of the prophets, when they prophesize, the limbs of their body are all trembling, and the physical body is weak, and their strength become all completely confused. And then the mind of the person, the mind of the Navi, is totally removed of any of his physical being, and it's totally available to understand, to understand what it is that he prophesizes. That's the description of a Navi. So the point here is, the Nevuah is not just the fact that Hashem is powerful and he can communicate to anyone that is worthy for Nevuah. But the point here is also to describe the character of the Navi, that he becomes unified and he's taking in the words of Nevuah that Hashem is telling him into his seichel, into his understanding. That's the geder, the oifen, the style of how Hashem communicates with the Navi. That is an important part of the principle of faith regarding the way Hashem communicates with Nevi'im. Since the point here is that Nevuah, prophecy, is not just simply a godly revelation, but it's a godly revelation that becomes unified with the entity of the prophet. Biz as Yehafech Leish Acher, as the Rambam describes in the first halacha, he becomes like a completely different person. V'yavin b'daitai, and he understands, he has a different awareness. She'ena k'may shehaya, he's not anymore the same person he was. El shenis'ala al mailas shar b'nei adam hachachamim, he's on a completely different level from all the other people, even the wise people. The Rebbe, so therefore, zenen in der yediyah leida, so part of this understanding and this principle of faith regarding Nevuah, oich negeya di darkei Nevuah, the ways of how one comes to prophecy, is also relevant to understanding what this principle of Nevuah is all about. And as the Rambam continues and explains at length the process of how a person comes to Nevuah. This is not just simply telling you facts of how a person can come to this, but this gives you the proper understanding what Nevuah is all about, what this principle of faith in the character of Hashem's communication is. The Rambam goes on to explain, when he enters into the orchard, again, which is a place of holy, godly revelation, and he continues going further, deeper into these matters, these great matters, that are very distant from us here in this physical world. And as the Rambam describes it, that here, his intellect, he'll have the proper and right understanding to grasp and understand. And he continues going higher and greater in his holiness, and he separates from the ways of the masses of the people that are here living and going in matters in the world in the darkness of time. And he, the Navi, goes higher with an alacrity, and he trains himself that he should not have any thoughts at all from any of the matters of the world that are pointless. V'loy mahavlei azman, and not of anything of nonsense of the times of this world, the tachpoloisov, and everything else that goes on here in this world. Eladaitoi pnuya tamid lamaila. His mind is completely empty of all the nonsense of the world and totally available and open, constantly to be connected and focused above. Kshura tachas akise, totally bound under Hashem's holy throne. Lohavin, to understand. Ba'isa natsurais, in the great spiritual creatures. Hagdoishais, holy creatures. Hatohire is pure. Umistakel b'chachmasai, and the Navi then is able to gaze with his wisdom. Or again, mistakel b'chachmasai shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he gazes upon the wisdom of Hashem. Kula, all of it, mitzura rishoina tabar haaretz, from the highest spiritual creature till the lowest existence here in the depths of the earth. V'yidei man godlike, and he learns and understands the greatness of Hashem from all of this. Here the Rebbe highlights the fact that the Rambam uses three expressions, lahavin, b'chachmasai, v'yideya, which corresponds to chachma, bina, and das, chabad. On Demol, the Rambam concludes that then, miyad, ruach hakodesh shoydol, the spirit of holiness, the prophecy, will dwell upon him. Das alles, this entire description of the level of the Navi, is negeya onatel from them, yisodei das leida. This is part of the principle of faith, to know what prophecy is all about. So the point that we see here is, prophecy is not just the fact that Hashem, on his behalf, decides to communicate with a human being, to share his secrets with somebody. Rather, the inyan of Nevuah is that there's a unification. That there's unification between Hashem and his communication with the Navi, the prophet, that's on a level that his seichel, his das, his understanding is so purified that it's totally open and focused and connected to the prophecy that he experiences. That's really the principle of faith. To understand that our belief is that Hashem can become completely unified with a human being here in the world through prophecy. So now, based on this, we'll understand the qualities and the character that Rambam speaks about for one to be a prophet. So now we can understand what are the conditions for prophecy and why the Rambam enumerates these conditions that he brings. And he does not quote what's mentioned in the Gemara about being physical mighty or rich or humble. The Rambam is nicht eisen zu reden wegen alle Tnoim, wir sind nötig zu Ashras HaNevuah. The Rambam is not here to tell you what are all the conditions for the Shechinah, for Nevuah to rest upon a person. Nor blois wegen die, was man darf, leda als Yiseda das. The Rambam here is coming to describe the level and the character, the quality of the Navi that are relevant for understanding the principle of faith that Nevuah is, that unification that there is between Hashem and the Prophet. Und das is as eina nevuah chala, and regarding this, the Rambam describes and says that nevuah will not take effect ela al chacham gadol b'chachma, one that's very wise in his wisdom, gibar b'midaisav, very very strong in his character, and v'lo yeh yitzra mizgaber olav elohum mizgaber b'daita el yitzrei. He never allows the yetzer, his inclination, to overcome him. Rather, he's strong in his mind to overcome his inclination. Baldeya rechava ad ma'id, a very broad mind to a great extent, as described before, about how the Navi can remove himself from all nonsense and all matters in the world and to be completely focused and available and connected to the holiness of Hashem's revelation in him. So the Rambam is bringing all of these qualifications. Varam das zenen in yonim in etzem geder nevuah. These are the qualifications that describe the very essence of what prophecy is all about, which is what the Rambam is focusing on. To explain the principle of faith, the possibility that could be a unification between Hashem and the Navi. This helps us understand the fundamental or the principle of prophecy, as das is an anaifim was poilt in das Adam. That this is something which is not just a godly revelation to a human being, but rather it's a godly revelation within the das, within the understanding, within the seichel, the intellect of this Navi. Ubemele is negeya the matzah from das at chunas Adam, when the nevuah is chalavim, and therefore it's relevant for the Rambam to explain the character and the refinement of character of the Navi in order to experience the prophecy in such a manner. Mashenkein the andere inyanim. By contrast, the other points that the Gemara speaks about, Giba, Asher, Va'ani, to be mighty or rich and humble, then employs Tnoim, was the Navi darf haben, auf Eshras Hanavur Mulmaila. These are conditions regarding preconditions that the Navi has to possess them in order to be worthy for the Nevuah to take effect upon him. They are not a part of the very description of the essence of what prophecy is about. The way the prophecy, the way the communication of Hashem gets unified with the das, with the mind of the person. These are separate preconditions for one to merit prophecy. So therefore, nit negeya in dem leida von dem Yisayid hadas in Yinan Nevuah. Therefore, the Rambam doesn't quote this because this is not what's relevant here, where the Rambam is discussing Nevuah, prophecy, from the standpoint of explaining this as a principle of faith. Gevura und Ashiris bringen areis de shleimus hagashmi shel adam. Being physically mighty or being rich, literally, those are things that bring out the fact that a person is complete in his existence, but regarding his physical existence. So they are necessary preconditions for the Shekhinah to rest upon a person, to be on a state of completeness, even physically. Und Anav is negayet zu arabnemen ameniyet zu ashras hashchina. Being humble is relevant in order to remove something that would prevent the Shekhinah to rest upon a person. Because this is not only regarding a prophet, rather the Gemara says regarding any person, anybody that is haughty. Hashem says about him, Hashem says, myself and this individual cannot be together in the world. And also based on what the Gemara says, and the Rambam brings this, one that is a balgaiva, one that is stuck up and is haughty and has that kind of a spirit, is like he's denying Hashem's existence. So the idea of a nova is not a intrinsic expression of what Nevuah is all about. And the same also with Gibber and Asher. They are preconditions for it to be possible for the Shekhinah, the Nevuah, to rest upon this person. The Rambam here, however, is only bringing the things about the character of the Navi, which describe the essence of the nature of Nevuah, in order to describe what it is, this principle of faith, of Nevuah, that is, as I mentioned, is explained before here, the unification between Hashem and the Prophet. Those are the qualities that the Rambam mentions. Now, based on this, Yesh levayer euch dem Chiluk zwischen dem Maimer Azal, wie bringt sich in the Dorim, und wie bringt sich in Shabbos. We could also understand the difference between the statements of Chazal as they describe the qualifications for a Navi, as it's quoted in the Gemara in the Dorim, and the way it's quoted in the Gemara in Shabbos. Zwischen die zwei Inyanim Anal, the 2 points, the 2 characteristics mentioned before, Aleph, Gibar v'Asher, the physical qualifications of being strong and rich, und Beis, Anav, being humble. Chach bechlal is Anav atnai, versus merer hechrich zu ashras hashchina v'gvura nashiris, even though generally it could be said that being humble is more of a necessary precondition for the Shekhinah resting upon a person than the physical conditions of being mighty and rich, is of a beprat echad. On the other hand, though, in one aspect, gvura v'ashiris shayach me b'oifin yashar zu nevuah ashras hashchina. Being physically strong and rich is something which is more directly relevant for the resting of the Shekhinah than humility. Why is that the case? For the inyan fun hanava is an inyan klali. The quality of being humble, this is something which is actually very general and not specifically for prophecy. This is something which is relevant not only for prophecy, as that a person should be on the level that Hashem will prophesy, or Hashem will communicate with a human being. This is on any level of relation with Hashem, on any level of the Shekhinah resting here in the world. As the Gemara clearly says, quoted before, Hashem says, I cannot dwell at all in the world in a place where there is gaiva, where there's haughtiness. So that has nothing to do specifically with Nevuah. Furthermore, Behaaloscha Yedua, to use the famous expression that Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, Hashem will not dwell only on something which is completely subservient and nullified to Hashem. So this is something which is very general, about any place where there is a dwelling of Shekhinah. By contrast, when it comes to physical might and riches, these are preconditions for a certain level of completeness in the person, even physically, for prophecy to be able to come upon this person. Just like prophecy demands a person to be at utmost perfection in the qualities of the person, to be very wise, very strong character, kanal, as the Rambam says. It demands also as a precondition to be physically complete, physically strong, and riches. So therefore the gvura and ashiris is something which is unique as a qualification for nevuah. Now here the Rebbe adds, to understand why this is a precondition for nevuah, the qualifications, the physical qualifications of being strong, mighty, and rich, is similar to what the Rambam says in Ilchus Shuvah Menegeh to the Yehudim Gashmiyim Shebetayra, explaining what are all the physical promises that Torah tells us when one will be Mekayim Torah and mitzvahs, the reward will be all kinds of physical things. And the Rambam there says this is not the real reward. So what is this about? This is not the reward for fulfilling Torah and mitzvahs. Rather, these are all things that Hashem rewards a person, which will benefit him and assist him in order to come to the most complete level of learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. As the Rambam there says, that Hashem will remove all those things that may prevent us from learning Torah, from learning on Mekayim Zay mitzvahs and fulfilling the mitzvahs. And that is mashpia, and Hashem gives us an abundance, all the good that it strengthens us, to fulfill the Torah, to be satisfied, shalom, peace, and a lot of silver and gold. So it shouldn't be necessary for us to occupy ourselves with all these things that the physical body needs. What we should have the time and a free mind to be able to be occupied just with learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. That's what all this physical reward is all about. It's a precondition to enable a person to be focused on learning and davening and doing mitzvahs. Similar could be said regarding the physical qualifications and the preconditions to be a prophet. As wenn in the Milas von Chacham Gadol, Gibor b'midaisa v'chula, v'yim b'shleimus, when can he be truly, totally focused and be wise and have full, pure character? Be'ez, hat euch die Milas agashmis von Gvura v'ashiris. If he has nothing that is distracting him physically, because he's physically mighty and he's physically strong and he also is very rich, so then everything physically is in place and taken care of, so he's able to totally focus on his spiritual connection to Hashem and his spiritual character. That's the precondition of Gvura and Ashiris. Okay, so now based on this, we can now explain the difference between what it says in the Gemara in Nedarim and what it says in the Gemara in Shabbos regarding the qualifications of the Shekhinah resting upon a person. So now we can say, in order to answer and to reconcile the two sugyas in Gemara that discuss the qualifications of a prophet, that they're not speaking about the same level at all. As in Masechta Shabbos, in the Gemara in Shabbos, it speaks about prophecy. Prophecy is a high level of godly communication. On a Nedarim, and then in the Gemara in Nedarim, it speaks about a prophecy on a much lower level. It speaks about the Shekhinah resting upon a person in general, and it gives the qualifications for that. Now, Behektim, just as an introduction to understand sources in Chazal where we see various different levels of the Shekhinah resting upon a person, in the meaning for Shekhinah Shaira, when it comes to the Shekhinah resting upon a person's in a Faran, there are many, many levels to this. On even from the Nevuas Moshe, the highest level being Moshe Rabbeinu's level of prophecy, B'Shlei Musa, on its highest level, Biz, and then coming to the most basic level where the Shekhinah rests upon people, as it says in the Gemara, Akol Be'asare Shechin Tesharya. When you have 10 Yidden together, the Shekhinah rests there. And there the Alter Rebbe says about this Gemara, that's Va'af She'ena Medabrim B'Divrei Torah. That's when you have 10 Yidden together, even if they're not discussing any matter of Torah. So that's obviously Also, a level of Ashras Shechina, but much lower than the level of Shechina that dwells upon Moshe Rabbeinu. Even just looking at the level of Nevuah by Moshe Rabbeinu himself, there were various levels. Nevuahs Moshe B'Shleimusa, there's the complete and highest level of Nevuah by Moshe Rabbeinu Ki B'Parsha Seinu, that's described in the end of our Parsha, and V'nema V'lekom Navi Yod Ki Moshe Goyim. Here the Torah describes how there's no prophet ever that will be like Moshe Rabbeinu. And then there's Visis Given Eider Vosnis Asher Moshe, the level of prophecy that Moshe Rabbeinu experienced before he became rich, Mipsoltan Shaluchais, from the remnants of the Luchais that made him rich. This includes even the time period after he already received the Torah, but he still didn't come to his complete level of prophecy. And then there's the Lamed Ches Shana Vasidin Zene Given in Midbar. There were 38 years that Moshe Rabbeinu was with the Yidden in the desert. Eider was Tamu Anshi al Mulchama Lamas, before the Yidden from the age of 20 to 60 passed away during that time period in the Midbar. Was Lenis Yached Imay Hadibor Beloshin Chiba Panam al Panim. So then, the level of prophecy, Moshe Rabbeinu did not experience a level of prophecy with love face to face, v'yishuv adas, with a settled mind. V'yod, there's additional levels of prophecy that can be described regarding Moshe Rabbeinu and Bechlal, regarding the Shechina resting upon a person. So now, applying this to the Gemara of Shabbos that talks about a higher level of Nevuah, and the Gemara of Nedarim that talks about a basic level of Nevuah, or even just in general the fact that Hashem comes down to a person that's on a more basic level. So based on this, is the Shinui Aloshin in the Sugyas. The difference in the expression that there is in Shabbos and in Nedarim, as pointed out before, Eina Shchina Shoyre, that in the Gemara and Nedarim it uses the term Shchina, and in Shabbos it says, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mashra Shchinasai. Or rather, I think it's the other way around. Again, the Gemara in Nedarim is the one that says, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mashra Shchinasai, that Hashem will not have his Shechina rest upon a person, but in Shabbos it just simply says, Ein HaShechina Shayra. So what's the difference between these two expressions? So here the Rabbi gives us another introduction to understand this, based on what we said before, that in Shabbos we're talking about a person that's worthy and on a higher level to be worthy of Nevuah, and in the Nedarim it's speaking about a person that's on a lower level. Because he says, Yidu ad klal. There is a rule that's known, which is as follows: As dafke agavoya biyaser, it's only something which is very high, has a very high source and is very powerful, is shayre lamata yaser, can extend downward and dwell in an even lower place. This is a cloud that's brought in Chassidus and explained at length regarding Hashem's unlimited power, that the greater and more powerful the source of godliness that's here, the lower down it will extend and will be expressed. And therefore that's applied over here regarding prophecy as well. In Masechta Nedarim, the Gemara in Nedarim speaks about a person that's on a lower level. The Allah Mailis, the Eisgerechend in Masechta Shabbos. He doesn't have all the qualifications that are mentioned in the Gemara in Shabbos. The main one, actually, that the Gemara there does not mention is the qualification of being a Bal Kaima, being tall. But the Rabbi in the Ha'ara here points out that being tall includes also their height, that it says there regarding the Levian, that there were 10 amas tall, including the shleimus of their character and all 10 qualities of a person. So that is not mentioned here in the Gemara in Nedarim. The Eisgerechend in Masechta Shabbos as mentioned in Shabbos. Und der Fahr is by ihm voran nor dem Inyan von Anavua Pchusa Yeser, and therefore he only experiences a lower level of prophecy. Oder Ashras Shechina Bechlal, or the resting of the Shechina even without prophecy, but a certain level in general of the Shechina resting upon this person. So kum di Ashra migavaya Yeser. The fact that Hashem extends down to this person is on a lower level, is not qualified, so this is a greater extension, a greater revelation to a further point to come down to this person. Therefore the Gemara uses the expression, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Mashra Shchinasai, that Hashem brings down his Shechina to this low place. Masha'enkein in Masechta Shabbos, where Retzach wegen Nevuah b'madrege gevoya, in Shabbos, where the Gemara speaks about Nevuah on a higher level, is Hishre Shchinasai, von sich allein. Here we're talking about a person that's a keli for this. He's on the level where he's worthy for this. Therefore here it just simply talks about the fact that naturally this is a place where the Shechina is expressed. That's the basic difference between these two sugyas. And that explains why the Gemara in Nedarim is not mentioning the qualification of being a Baal Kaima, which is something unique about the higher level of Nevuah that it speaks about in the Masechta Shabbos. And with this, we could also understand the other differences. We can explain the other points that are different in the language of the two Gemaras. In Masechta Shabbos, in the Gemara in Shabbos, where it speaks about Ashras HaNevuah, rather, where it speaks about the Nevuah that rests upon a person on a high level, the Fa sagt the Gemara as the erste Tnai is as soll sein Chacham. So therefore, for the person to be qualified and to be refined, to be a Keli for the Nevuah in this on a high level of Nevuah, the first qualification is wisdom. Was Bechlalos is das Kailol ala Mailas Sichlius und ala Mailas Amidis. When it speaks about wisdom, it includes all levels of quality as far as the person's intellect is concerned, and also all the levels of quality even in his emotions as well that follow and are influenced by a person's intellect. How does the person have the power to have a pure heart and overcome any evil inclination in his heart? It's because of the power of the mind that's so clear and power and strong. And it's only a person that never could the Yetzer Hara overcome him in any matter of the world is ba'im da d'shleimus from Mailas HaSichlios. That's when he could have a really pure and open mind for Nevuah, for the Shekhinah to dwell upon him. This is the real qualification of the Shekhinah dwelling in a person, as mentioned before at length. When the Rambam discusses Nevuah, what's the main thing that Rambam focuses on? Where is the prophecy? Where is the communication of Hashem unified with the Navi? It's in his mind and in his das. That's open and is a keli for Hashem's Nevuah to be unified with him. So here, when the Rambam is discussing Nevuah, even on a high level, the first thing that the Gemara that is, the Gemara in Shabbos, when it discusses this, the first thing it mentions is the Chochmah, which is the main keli, the main qualification for Nevuah, as understood from the Rambam. Nachdem the Gemara mamshich, and then the Gemara continues and adds, Giboy v'asher b'kayma, to be strong and rich and to be tall. In Yanam Umaylas, so these are other qualifications, Gashmi and even physical qualifications, but then in Tnoim and Pratim, so these are conditions and details, was helfen, gibben zu Shleimus in the Maila von Chacham. They assist and they add perfection to the main Maila of the Navi, the fact that he's wise. And this also explains why here in the Gemara, humility is not mentioned. Because humility is something which is a precondition in general to have any kind of relationship with Hashem. It's not unique to resting of prophecy upon a person, which is what the Gemara in Shabbos is focused on, specifically prophecy and even a high level of prophecy. So therefore, Anav, as brought before from the Gemara and from Tanya, that's a general qualification regarding having any relationship with Hashem. So therefore, that's not relevant to mention specifically here. Oh, but in the Nedarim, by contrast, the Gemara in the Nedarim, here, the Gemara is not discussing the conditions which are necessary for the dwelling of the Shekhinah, or the dwelling of Nevuah, that is, specifically the level of Shekhinah that comes down to a level of prophecy. Not euch ubeike zu dem kloligen Ashra v'shayches von HaKadosh Baruch Hu mit Ben Adam Dalamata. But the Gemara is discussing also, and actually primarily, the general qualifications for the resting of the Shekhinah and relationship of a human being with Hashem here below. And therefore, the Gemara number 1 brings the qualification of humility, which is a very general qualification for the Shekhinah to be there. Was bringt zu them as a Kadosh Baruch Hu that causes that Hashem should be able to rest here. And secondly, mahai taime hype dort on the Gemara mit Chacham, hype dort on the Gemara nit mit Chacham. The Gemara does not open with the first qualification being the person's wisdom. Was is negei b'miyuchad by Ashras HaNevuah, because that's something which is unique to Nevuah, to prophecy. And over here in this Gemara, we're not focusing primarily on prophecy, we're focusing on Bechlal, on a person being qualified for any level of Ashras HaShekhinah, maybe a lower level of prophecy as well. And therefore here it begins with first talking about the completeness of a person being a Giboy and an Asher, and that's how a person is qualified. Chachmah comes later as one detail, but we're not talking about the real concept and the shleimus of Nevuah, where the Navi becomes totally unified with the prophecy, with the communication of Hashem. That explains the difference between the two sugyas that discuss the union of Nevuah. They're speaking about Nevuah or Hashra, the resting of the Shekhinah, on a completely different level. Now the Rebbe comes back based on this whole explanation and based on the explanation that was said before regarding how the Rambam defines prophecy. That the idea of prophecy is not simply Hashem communicating, but it's also that unification, that Hashem is becoming unified in and through prophecy in the mind of the Navi. With this we can understand how the Rambam defines and where he places the principle of faith of Nevuah. Al-Pi Anal Sifei, based on what was explained before in Sifei. In the Bia, you say that Das Sheb Nevuah, understanding the principle of faith of prophecy, Ved Ferenfet Veren Noch Hashayla Rambam. It will answer another question in the Rambam. The Sefer HaIkrim, which discusses the principle of faith that the Rambam speaks about, is Masbid and Tam, was rechent Teirem and Hashemayim al Tzekir. He deviates from the Rambam and he actually says that Teireh being from heaven and not some humanly thought up idea, but the fact that Teireh is heavenly, Hashem gave it to us. Als Ikke, that's a principle of faith. Und Nevuah als Hasherish Mistaf Menu. And he considers prophecy just to be a certain root that comes out from the main point, which is the fact that Teireh is Min Hashemayim. Different than the Rambam. And he explains, Vala Nevuah is nitzeli dem as mentioned sollen wissen, because what is really the point of prophecy? Prophecy is not for people to have knowledge about their own personal matters. Hadvarim ha'ishiyim ha'mischatshim ba'ilam, regarding their personal things that happen to them in the world. Or in order to bring about any miracles or wonders regarding any person's own personal needs. That's not the point of prophecy. Nor kadesha tagia al yada hayishara lekis lemina adam, but rather that a person through prophecy can come to proper godly guidance through the human being, which is what Torah really is. So therefore, in that sense, prophecy is just a branch of the revelation of Torah. And therefore, he considers Torah to be Torah min hashamayim, the fact that we receive Torah from heaven to be the principle of faith, which prophecy is just a detail of that. So now, let's turn to the Rambam. The Rambam does count Nevuah as a separate principle of faith. So now we need to understand the Rambam Alein Zaktach. The Rambam himself also says, similar to the Ikrim, B'nigeya Navi, regarding a prophet, Im Kain Lama Nema B'Teira Navi Akim Lehem Mikerav Achem Kamoicha. Why does Hashem give us prophets amongst us? For what purpose? Loi Laseis Dasuba. He doesn't come to establish any religion. Elo letzavais al divrei Torah. Only his reason, the only reason the Navi is here for is to command us to fulfill the words of Torah. And to warn the people that do not transgress on the mitzvahs of the Torah. As the last Navi says in Malachi, Zichru Torahs Moshe Avdi. He's here just to warn us and to encourage us to remember the Torah of Moshe, my servant. Says no, but then the Rambam says that what happens is v'chein im tzivanu b'divrei reshus chulu. If the Navi also comes and commands regarding other areas of our life, permissible matters, mitzvah l'shmayalai, we have a mitzvah to follow and listen. V'ha'ivr al dvarav chayv misa. If you don't listen to the Navi, then the punishment is death. Abenit tzilibden huba. That's not, however, the reason why prophecy exists, why he comes for. That's what the Rambam clearly says. So the question is in the Yud Gimel Ikrim? So why did the Rambam, that organized the order of the 13 principles of faith in Pirish HaMishnayos, Perik Chelek, in his Pirish HaMishnayos, in the end of Sanhedrin, as the Ikrim, the Yisaidis in Nevuah, or Nevuahs Moshe, that the fundamentals and the principles about prophecy and about the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu kommen gleich noch die erste 5 Ikrim wie Yisaid is wegen Metzias Hakel. They follow immediately after the first 5 principles that talk about the existence of Hashem. Und as Roi la'avda Yisaid hey, the 5th principle is that one should serve Hashem. And then right after that is where he brings the principles of faith about prophecy. Kaidem von dem Yisaid Hashmini, and he brings this before the 8th principle, as Torah is min hashamayim, that Torah is from heaven. Und dem Yisaid Hashi, in the 9th principle, wegen heder ashiniyin Torah, regarding the fact that there will be no change in any of the 630 mitzvahs of the Torah. Seemingly, first the Rambam should be bringing the union of Torah, and then afterwards he should be bringing the idea of prophecy, since the Nevi'im are all just here to encourage us to fulfill what it says in the Torah. The Rambam halt as alle Yud Gimel Zenen Ikrim. It is the Rambam's opinion that all of these 13 principles are principles of faith. It kedas bala Ikrim, unlike the opinion of the Ikrim that says that prophecy is just a detail. It's a detail of Torah. But the Rambam says no. Prophecy is a principle for itself. But yet, there is, however, a order of what comes first and what comes next in the principle of faith, the way the Rambam counts them. And based on what the Rambam himself says, of Rambam's own words, so the two principles about prophecy, the sixth principle about prophecy in general, when you say the Zayin, the Vus Moshe Rabbeinu, and the seventh principle regarding the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, gedarf stellen noch the Yisayid is wegen Torah. The place it belongs is to be after the principle regarding Torah. Another question here is, was is negeya in Sefer Hayad as das was akel menave as bnei Adam is mi Yisayid yadas? Why is it relevant for the Rambam to point out that the fact that Hashem will communicate with a human being through prophecy, that this is a fundamental of the faith? Why does the Rambam make that point? Kedei zu folgen dem Navi, in order to know that we have to follow what the Navi says, is l'chayre blois negeya wissen. All that's relevant to know is that it's a mitzvah l'shmaya mimenu, that it's a mitzvah to listen to him. On atam al zeh is val shenema elof tishmon atzivi chodesh prati. There's a mitzvah. It's a specific mitzvah in the Torah that you must listen to the Navi. The fact that it's a principle of faith in the Sefer Hayad, the Sefer Halachas of the Rambam, why is it relevant to point that out? But based on what it was explained before, we could understand the order of how the Rambam brings in the inyan of Nevuah in the principles of faith. The revelation of prophecy to the prophets is ba'ofen as the Navi verdavok umu'uchad mitten dvar Hashem. Prophecy is not simply a communication, but it's the fact that the prophet becomes completely one, totally unified with the words of Hashem. Biz as dvar Hashem is ich mislabish b'sichlam v'asagosam. The words of Hashem become totally invested into their mind, into their comprehension, b'mare hanavuah, with the experience, vision of prophecy. V'gam b'machshavtam v'diburam, in their thought and speech as well. K'meshikos of ruach Hashem diber bi umilosei al l'shayni. The words of Hashem completely come through the words that the Navi speaks. V'yangedated in Rambam, as we see in the Rambam, and this is what the Rebbe explained before in Sifei, regarding the way the Rambam describes Nevuah, that it's the unification of Hashem with the existence of the Navi, on Nevuah ba'arucha b'Kabbalah and Chassidus. And it's explained even at much greater length in Kabbalah and Chassidus regarding the unification that a Navi experiences with Hashem's communication to him. That's the essence of what Nevuah is about. Now, to add to this, Bechlal zenen in Nevuah dot zwei or drei inyanim. Generally, we can divide prophecy into two or really three different areas. Aleph, Torah. Torah sagt, the Torah tells us, Nagvi akim lahem mikerev achem kamoicha gomer. I will establish there should be a Navi amongst you. And what's the point of the Nevuah? Kedei letzavos al divrei Torah. In order to command, to encourage Yidden to fulfill the words of Torah. Bei is another area of Nevuah. A mitzvah sasei b'fnei atzmai. It's a separate and new mitzvah for itself. As medar folgen Navi, that you must follow the words of a prophet. Eine von the Taryag mitzvahs. It's one of the 613 mitzvahs. Elof tishmon, to listen to a prophet. And v'ha'over al dvarov chayiv misi b'dei shamayim chulu. If you don't listen to the prophet, then the punishment is death, as mentioned before. And then Gimel. Then comes a third point about what a Navi is. As is mi Yisayid yadas. It's a principle of our faith. The point of here is not just simply the fact that there's a specific mitzvah about listening to what the Navi says, nor rather the principle of faith here is leida shahakel menabas bnei adam, the knowledge that a person should believe and understand and know that Hashem prophesies, Hashem communicates with human beings. And as explained before, that Hashem communicates with human beings in a specific manner. As the Reibishter Vertnis Gala, Gila Soide, Hashem reveals his secrets, his menabes b'nei adam ba'ofen shel his achtos, in dem das hanavi. Hashem becomes totally unified with and in the mind of the prophet. Mislabeshes b'sichlam v'asagasam chulu. He totally becomes invested in the understanding and in the comprehension of the Navi. Bis to the Shleimus Bezeh, to the highest level of unification, Nevuas Moshe Rabbeinu, the level of the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, as the Rambam describes, was Misnaba Vu Er V'Oimet, he would prophesy while he was awake and standing. Moshe Rabbeinu had a power in his mind, Lahovin Divrei Nevuah, to understand and experience prophecy, V'Oimet Alam Shalom, and he was able to stand on his feet. With the other pratim, with the Rambam is Meirich Bezen, in Hemshach HaPerik in Hilchas Yisei De'atayra, and in Nikra Zayin and Perik Chelek, as the Rambam speaks about this in Hilchas Yisei De'atayra. Biz, to the point, describing Moshe Rabbeinu, that V'nikshira Daitoi L'tzurei Lamin, that his mind became totally bound and one with the rock of the world, with Hashem. V'lei nistalik mi'olav ha'hoid la'olam, and the radiance of Hashem never removes from him. The Koran, Oyer Panav, and his face, the skin on his face, radiated in Niskalish Kimalachim, and he became pure and holy like a Malach. That's the ultimate unification, where it's not just a prophecy that Hashem communicates through you, but the Moshe Rabbeinu, to the greatest extent, more than all other Nevi'im, became totally unified to the point that he is one with the Nevuah. He becomes totally holy. Move on. So based on this, we can now understand how the Rambam views Nevuah and where he puts it in the order of the 13 principles of faith. Was the Yesod is wegen Nevuah, so the principles regarding prophecy kommen gleich behemshach zu the Yesod is ve'ikrim wegen Metzias Hashem. They follow immediately after the Rambam talks about the principles and the fundamentals about the existence of Hashem. And it comes immediately following the fifth principle, that is about the fact that a person should be serving Hashem. And we can now also understand why the Rambam makes it a point to mention in the Sefer Hayad, when he speaks about prophecy, as das is miyesodei yadas, that this is a fundamental of the faith. He's not just simply speaking about the concept of the possibility of Hashem communicating with a human being. Rather, the Rambam here is speaking about the third aspect mentioned here. Here we're talking about the understanding, the knowledge, the belief that we have in the concept of Nevuah is negeya in hemshich tzu yediyas metzias Hashem. This is part of understanding how Hashem's existence is and how his existence is revealed and expressed. Und sein Gilui Seidai, the way he reveals his secrets, Gilui u'pu'ula geluya in Welt, and how Hashem acts and openly acts in his revelation in the existence of the world. So in this sense, the idea of Nevuah is not a detail of Torah min hashamayim, a part of the guidance of Torah for a person how to live life in this world. In this sense, Adarabah, the concept of Nevuah is continuing and explaining how Hashem reveals himself in the world, and how Hashem could be unified with a human being. And therefore it follows, right after the Rambam talks about Hashem's existence and how, the extent of what a person does to serve Hashem, and in Nevuah, in the following faith that the Rambam says, in the principle of faith that is, it becomes completely unified with Hashem in his very existence. That's the order, and that's the way that the Rambam defines the concept of Nevuah.